Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to see some of you return and to see new faces as well. This is WeCo's webinar learning series. It is part of our mission to make the world a more accessible place by providing free learning based on our expertise. Today, we're going to be talking about demystifying US digital accessibility requirements and really understanding that difference between guidelines and laws, which can sometimes be very confusing. A little bit more about us. Digital Accessibility by WeCo, our company, we are a group of digital technologists who all live with disabilities. And as you know, our mission is to make the world more accessible for everyone and to put our clients in touch with subject matter experts who live with disabilities. We are a part of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, and we pride ourselves on being real because simulating disabilities can be somewhat helpful, but isn't really an authentic way to replicate our experience as users. I am Lynn Wehrman. I am the founder and president of Digital Accessibility by WeCo, and that is my new picture. So I was excited to get that in there. And about this session, we really like to make this interactive today. We're usually a pretty small group on these live webinars, which is wonderful. So feel free to chat your thoughts and questions right into that chat box while I'm presenting. And we have with us today two of our client relations specialists, Debbie Heilich and Patty Constant, and they will feed me questions, and you can certainly direct questions at them too if you need assistance. And we will also open up the floor for open discussion at the end. So I'd like to just start to talk a little bit about my own experience with guidelines and laws, and my promise that I will keep this simple. This is not going to go, I am not a lawyer, and this presentation is not intended to be legal advice, nor should it be construed to be. It is simply my viewpoint of how I look at the laws and guidelines and how we approach them here at WeCo based upon our experience. My experience, first experience with guidelines and laws was when I became a federal program coordinator for the Minnesota Department of Transportation here in the United States. I was managing a grants program that was federally funded, that was funneled through state government to county and city entities. And that really taught me a lot about where the lines are drawn and how things are governed, especially when you have essentially 3 to 4 different levels of government bodies that are touching the same pots of cash. So my clients were my grantees, the people who qualified for the grants, and those were usually Minnesota city and county transit agencies. I was a rural transit assistance program coordinator. Our program trained small community bus drivers so that they understood how to properly tie down wheelchairs and work with members of the public who lived with disabilities. But those grantees were my clients. The agency that I worked for and the agencies that my clients worked for were the stewards. And I learned that responsibility followed the dollars, and often more than one direction. A really good example of that, I went through 2 federal audits while I was a program coordinator and came out of them just fine, learned a lot. But what I also learned is that some of my grantees were audited in the process, and they said, we don't need to be audited, because that's MnDOT's responsibility. But the federal auditor said, anyone that receives these grant dollars can be audited. Forgive me, I'm just going to turn down my heat. So my furnace makes a lot of noise in this office. So that was something that I learned, that is important, that multiple agencies can make their own rules They can overlap and it can get complicated. So I think that that basis of coming from there was why helped me understand some of the complexities that are tied to how the United States and countries across the world are doing their own laws on accessibility and how that interweaves with guidelines and other things that we're going to talk about today. So just to make it crystal clear, and this may be something that's pretty obvious, but it also may be something that we don't all think about all the time, that there is a difference between what we call a guideline and a law. Guidelines are suggestions. They may also be called best practices. They're usually developed by professionals or professional groups. And guidelines are usually optional. That means that being ignorant of them doesn't always carry any kind of an impact. Laws are legally based, developed by lawmakers, and they're required, which means that being ignorant of them can create legal ramifications. So that's why it's really important to understand which is which. In the United States, we have two primary laws that govern our digital accessibility. The first is the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. Second is the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 508. This one usually throws people for a loop because they see that date, 1973, and they think that this predates the internet, predates the prevalence of computers in our lives. So therefore, it can't really be about websites or digital access, and it is. So we'll be talking about that more in the next few slides. But there's also another layer of legal requirements that it's important for all of us to be aware of when we are trying to make things digitally accessible, particularly if we're doing this for clients as creative firms, or if we are trying to sell a product to the government. And that is locally crafted policies around accessibility. So there are several states in the United States that have additional policies that point to how you can sell software into procurement systems in state government and how accessible they need to be, what that's defined as. So here in Minnesota, where WeCo's headquarters are, here in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area, we have a state of Minnesota non-visual technology accessibility standard that it's easy to find this if you want to look it up. It is actually a pretty short list, but what it does is that it reinforces commonly accepted industry standards for digital procurement, but just gives another layer of definition about what the state of Minnesota requires for the software that they purchase for use by the state. So it's important to realize that if you're going to be selling to a government, you're going to want to just take a look and see if they have any additional local policy to make sure that you're adhering to that as well. That's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about what we have for digital accessibility guidelines. Well, the guideline is called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. It is really common for me to talk with clients that think that this is a law. They're not 100% sure if it's United States or if it's worldwide, but it's such a widely accepted set of suggestions. It's very prescriptive. It was developed by a group of professionals called the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C. We're showing their logo there. And it's just become so universally accepted that a lot of people get mixed up about the fact that it is really a set of suggestions. Okay. So why is this confusing? The thing that is really fascinating about the WCAG is that to date, 39 countries across the globe have applied WCAG guidelines in some form to their own digital accessibility laws. And I am a geek and I love this particular page because it's fascinating. But the W3C has a page on their website, which I'm showing a screenshot here, where you can search which governments, world governments, are using W3C, have folded it into the law. And there's an entire search engine where you can filter the policies to look up what level they have incorporated, what the scope is, what the type of policy is, so that you can easily find wherever you are in the world or whoever you want to do business with if they are using the WCAG as part of their laws. So I think that this is why the edges have started to blur between guidelines and laws, is because it's getting so common. WCAG is so widely accepted and becoming accepted by governments across the world that it is just simply part of our life, which as accessibility professionals makes our job much easier. And I remember back when we had people that were adhering to Section 508, and Section 508 at that time had no aspects of WCAG in it, and others that were adhering to WCAG. And our company learned them all so that no matter what people asked for, we could manual audit and help remediate to those levels. So let's talk about which of these laws actually apply to you. And I think that this is one area where we get a lot of confusion, particularly I find with our own web developer and people working in web development and creative design. There is kind of a prevalent understanding that all accessibility laws only apply to government bodies, and it's really not true. Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, just a little bit of interesting history. This was the first set of digital accessibility standards that were crafted and released. So it was our very early, most prescriptive guidance. And I didn't list this on the slide, but there was a whole self-regulatory piece that went with this called a voluntary product accessibility template. You may use it, you may have heard of it, called VPAT. And that is a template that someone who was seeking to sell to government could complete to provide to the government when they were shopping for their products, to let them know that they had done due diligence on accessibility. In 2017, the Section 508 was refreshed and WCAG version 2.0 AA was applied to that refresh. So at that point in 2017, Section 508 began to look a lot more like WCAG. Not entirely, not everything was the same, but it made our jobs at WeCo a lot easier. We were pretty happy about that, I recall. So if you are selling to governments, or if you are a government entity, Section 508 is something that you need to be aware of. Even though things have changed, that Section 508 is still a part of what you will need to comply with. All right. Now, here's the one that is so surprising to many of us, especially those of us that work in creative, is that the Americans with Disabilities Act applies to everyone. And I don't mean people that work for government. I don't mean people in big business, everyone. Any place of public accommodation, be it private, small or large business, nonprofits, for-profits. I always say, even if you decide to work with your neighbors to come up with a neighborhood watch group or a barbecue club, and you decide to put a website out about it, that puts it out for public consumption. And under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a civil rights law, it needs to be accessible to everyone. So this is usually something that's a little earth-shattering for some of the clients that we work with, and that's why I think it's important to talk about it. Now, we just received last week the first web guidance that has ever been released on the Americans with Disabilities Act. A little bit on the history on this is that prior to the 2016 election, there was a whole set of guidance that was about to be released that looked a lot like the Section 508 refresh. It was ADA specific. What I attended a meeting with the US Access Board. I think it was in 2015. Oh no, it was in 2016. Take it back, 2017. And in 2017, after new administration came into the White House, they decided not to release that guidance. In fact, they said, we're going to roll back all of the requirements or all of the guidance so that there is no guidance. And what they couldn't do is they couldn't change that public place of accommodation, and they couldn't change the legal precedents that had been occurring. So we had seen organizations like Netflix get sued for releasing videos without captioning under the ADA. We'd seen a lot of digital accessibility compliance rulings going on with the Americans with Disabilities Act, but there was no specific written web guidance. So at that point, the DOJ said, we're not going to release it. And what happened is that lawsuits went through the ceiling, because where there is murkiness, there's a lot of opportunity for making arguments in court. So back in 2017, after that all came out, I did attend a meeting with the US Access Board, and we asked them, what do we do? You know, there is no guidance. What should we do? And they said, look to WCAG 2.0 AA. So that's why we knew that ADA guidance was going to look a lot like what had happened with the 508 refresh. What we do know is that the basic information about website accessibility and suggestions were released a couple of weeks ago. We know that it isn't highly specific yet, but one of our board members who is in touch with the works with US Access Board, attends their meetings, did say that there are people working behind the scenes. There is more to come. So I know that there are a lot of people that are not happy about the fact that the ADA web guidance wasn't terribly specific, but we have heard that that is going to change quite soon. But just in a nutshell, realize that if you are, if you are in the United States, if you're doing business in the United States, one of these laws is going to touch you. So digital accessibility is something that is required under US law for everyone. So what about local government policies? And stated this earlier, always take a check of any specific state government that you're looking at in particular. I'm personally not familiar of county or city governments that have done their own accessibility guidance, but it's entirely possible that they are. And just check their website. Most of these governments have their own section under accessibility. It should be relatively easy to find. So if you're selling internationally outside of the United States, it's important to know that the European Union currently endorses WCAG version 2.1 AA. The US Access Board endorses WCAG 2.0 AA. One of our contacts who does have some contact with the US Access Board said that the board is waiting for the next refresh of Section 508 before they adopt 2.1 AA or higher. So that's another standby. Also want to say that we have had some work. We have worked with some organizations in Canada, and the compliance for accessibility enforcement is pretty intense in Canada. They really want to get this done. They're making a lot of changes. So if you're new to doing business there, just be aware that you are going to need to comply with their accessibility laws. It's not going to be, no one is ever going to check on you. So the W3C page that I had mentioned before with the search engine is always a good place to check when you're doing business in another country. I just want to let you know that these presentations and our own people working and demonstrating devices is also available on our YouTube channel, and that we offer free accessibility assessments. It's just a great sample of our product. It's a sample of an audit, and it's a sample of a usability test with one of our certified testers living with a disability. And you can reach out to us on our website if you would like that free sample, or talk to Patty or Debbie, who are here today. And then we have tons of free resources on our website, free accessibility, and the recordings of these events are there as well as our blog and quick tips. So at this time, I'd like to just open it up for discussion. Do we have any comments or any questions?
The chat has been very quiet. No questions or comments in the chat at this time.
Okay. So this is one of the first webinars I've done where there's actually been time at the end for discussion and chats. One of the questions that I think that we get the most from people is, do I have to fill out a VPAT if I'm selling to government for Section 508? We have seen this change a lot in the last 5 to 10 years that we've been around. 10 years ago, we were filling out lots and lots of VPATs, and not so many anymore. I would say that you need to check with the RFP, check with the requirements of the particular government body that you're working with. All right, any other thoughts or questions? Okay. Well, I think that we can safely end this about 5 minutes early. I hope that everyone has gained some insights into this.
Hold on. We've got a question. Sorry, comment just came in before you wrap up. Says, you covered many aspects of the subject. Oh, no need for clarification. A quiet chat is not always a bad thing. Sorry, I didn't read it. I was doing it live. And we do have a question. Sarah asks, what version of WCAG does Canada stick to?
I believe that they are a 2.1 AA, but I can get back to you on that. I'm more of a company president than accessibility specialist these days, but we will get back to you.
Nothing further in the chat at this time.
Okay. Well, I just want to remind you, of course, this is an advertisement for us. We are your accessibility department at WeCo, and we are all users and digital technologists living with disabilities. We really appreciate you being here. Even if you don't purchase something from us, just supporting what we do and our mission is much appreciated. But please go ahead, go to our website and take advantage of our free resources. They're there for you. Otherwise, you can reach out to us directly at accessinfo@theweco.com, and our phone number 855-849-5050 extension 1. Patty and Debbie are also here in the chat if you have any specific questions about our products. We do hope this has been helpful, and thank you for coming. We can stop the recording.